All right, guys. Hey, thanks for taking the time out to watch this webinar. Wherever you're at, I appreciate your time, effort, and energy to be here with me today. My name's Ryan Lee, and if I've met you, if I know you, again, thanks for taking the time. If I haven't met you and you enjoy the information that you receive on this webinar, please feel free to reach out and contact me. But this webinar is something that I'm pretty excited about. It's something that's near and dear to my heart because it really is the essence of what I deal with, what I work with clients on achieving in their personal financial plan. So with that being said, this is a 3-part webinar series. And in this webinar series, we're going to focus on how to position your retirement assets to get you ready for retirement. So I'm going to start off with a pretty bold promise. This one webinar will be the single most important piece of information that you can consume to prepare for retirement. This will literally set the stage for nearly every financial decision that you make going forward. Knowing this, I'm going to do my best to give you as much concise information in this webinar as I can. So I've prepared this webinar now almost 5 or 6 different times. I've prepared it, I've shared it, I've prepared it, I've refined it, I've shared it. It's almost this is probably the 6th iteration, and it's all in an effort to literally compile and compress thousands of hours of client interaction and thousands of hours of study into about 1 hour. So this webinar is going to be just about that, about 1 hour. I'm going to be hustling to get through this information as in that time frame as quickly as I can. So if you need to push the pause button, go ahead, push the pause button. If you need to take a break, please do so, but come back and finish it, because I know this is a bold promise, but this webinar will set the stage for everything that you will do going forward if it's something that resonates with you. So one last thing, if you're like me, I like to watch things on double speed. So down in the lower right-hand corner of this webinar, there's a little gear button. You can click that gear button and it should allow you to increase the speed of the webinar. So really what this is a 3-part series. Part number 1 today, really it's all about pre-retirement asset positioning, where your assets should be positioned to get you ultimately ready for retirement. We're going to start off doing the dirty work first. We're going to start off with the problems with traditional retirement planning. So this webinar contains just that, the information that will separate you from retiring poor to understanding this information, which will give you the ability to retire with a higher, more efficient income stream from the assets that you already have. So it's a 3-part webinar series. So once we understand the problem, we're then going to dive into the solution, and then we're going to look at case studies and action steps and just different kind of creative strategies. So that's really where we're going to be. So we're going to dive right in. So buckle up, sit down, turn off all the distractions, and let's really go at this, okay? So this webinar is for anyone who is preparing for an eventual retirement. It doesn't matter if you're going to be retiring 20 years from now or if the anticipated date is tomorrow. This webinar will literally show you how to do one thing, and that is strategically position your assets in order to maximize your income in retirement. So if you're getting ready for retirement in any form or fashion, this webinar is for you. My goal of this webinar, and this might sound a little bit depressing, but my goal is quite simply to give you a very clearly and definitive breakdown of the traditional retirement model so that you can see it for what it truly is. This webinar is for anyone who's looking to get into retirement, and my goal ultimately is to show you why using the traditional retirement model, it is almost impossible for you to retire with confidence. So let me repeat that. It is almost impossible for you to retire with confidence using traditional financial strategies. So that's my goal. Your goal is going to be a little bit different. Your goal is to really start to decide and to see what it is you're trying to accomplish, and to really decide if this is a solution or a strategy that will help you mitigate and overcome the challenges that you're facing. Now, you're on this webinar for a reason, right? You're on this webinar because you realize, along with so many other people, that the retirement model that you're probably using is not really working and providing you what you want. So your goal is to ultimately see if this is a better solution for you. So the one thing, retirement is something that we've all anticipated, or many people have anticipated for such a long time. So many people put off their dreams and their aspirations to a future date. And what I find is as I work with clients, so many people, as they get closer and closer to retirement, rather than getting more and more excited, they get more and more apprehensive and more depressed. And so my goal is to help you be able to do one thing. It's to retire happy. It's to have confidence in what you have and know that what you have is positioned appropriately to give you what you're ultimately looking for. So, I have the privilege of working with clients on a one-on-one basis, helping assist them in learning how to build their financial plan that will put them in a better position to reach their financial goals. Over the years, I've found that most of us, 99% of people, we're all saving for the same reason. Whether we want to call it retirement, financial independence, cash flow, or anything else, the goal's usually the same. We want our assets ideally positioned so that they can produce the best, most efficient stream of income at some future point. No matter if you plan on retiring tomorrow or a few years down the road, that's ultimately the goal of what people are trying to accomplish. And my goal what this webinar is all about doing, it's about showing you how you can have more income from the assets that you're saving by positioning them appropriately, sometimes 20 to 80% more, without gambling in the Wall Street casino and, by the way, not having to eat dog food either, right? I've seen a lot of other strategies out there that require you to take more risk, buy this stock, do this ETF, get a second job investing in real estate, whatever it might be. It's none of those things. All this is showing you a way to start with the end objective in mind and helping you achieve more income without retiring poor or taking more risk. So if that appeals to you, let's dive into it. All right, to do this, let's look at the traditional approach that most people take for retirement planning. So we're going to look at this pretty quick and pretty concise. This is what we're told we should do, right? When we're ready to start saving, we should contribute to our company-sponsored 401k, because everyone knows contributing to your 401k, that aligns you with the market, and in many cases you're going to get free money, and this is the best way to prepare for retirement, right? If you've maxed out your 401k, go get a Roth IRA or set up another IRA and max that out, and then come back and max out even more IRAs, right, or qualified plans. Tax defer, align with the market, use target date funds, index funds, and all of this type of stuff. This is how we build up our assets getting ready for retirement. So what are we told that we get from using this approach? Well, the average person saves 8.1% of their income toward retirement. Now, if you go to the websites, you can download the presentation notes here and get the links that I'm using. On average, companies contribute 4.4% of the company's contributions to a retirement account as well. So let's look and see what this means. So if we've got an individual making $100,000, right, and he's saving 8% of his funds, or 8% of his income, that's $8,100, right? So if we take $8,100 and we add $4,400, which is the company match, then this individual is saving about $12,500 a year. And if we say that the market now averages, right, 10 to 12% over the next 30 years, if this person does just this and pushes the repeat button, right, this individual is going to end up with $3.3 million. Retirement planning is super easy, right? That's all we need to do. Invest in our 401k, get our match, and close our eyes and just pray it all works out, right? So I'm going to use this analogy quite a bit throughout this webinar, and it's this mountain analogy. There's two sides to a financial plan. The side of the financial plan that we're talking about right now is the accumulation side of the plan. And this is when we're working, we have an income coming in, and we're trying to figure out where to put our income to grow our income more efficiently. And most of the financial planning out there, most of the advice, most of the marketing is all around this, how to grow your money. So that's really what we want to look at. Now let's bring this calculator back up and let's just paste it right in here, because we're going to come back and we're going to look at this, right? Make it a little bit smaller so it doesn't chew up our whole page, but let's do that. So the next thing that we're going to look at is we're going to look at what's your number, right? And so this is kind of what retirement planning focuses on. You need to get to some magic number, and it's all about getting to the top of this proverbial financial mountain, having enough money accumulated in assets that you can one day retire. Now, I don't know, you probably remember these commercials. They're probably 5-6 years old. I liked them. I like to make fun of them, I guess is what I like to do. And they showed a bunch of people walking around their jobs in the city. They all had a number. And, these people, their number was so big they couldn't even get into the elevator. But this financial company was all about how, let us help you grow your number, right? Put your money with us and we'll help you grow your number. We'll get you in the right funds, the right target date funds, and grow your number. So that's really what most retirement planning focuses on. So now as we look at the number, now we've got to really translate this into what we think we're going to get out of this number. And we're going to look at the simplicity, and then we're going to focus on the results of all of this. Okay, so the outcome of all of this is one day when we get to the top of our proverbial financial mountain, right, we want to take our accumulated assets and we want to turn it into a distribution. or a stream of income, right? And this is ultimately what retirement's all about. Now, in the previous calculation, we said we were going to have, 3 million plus in assets, but let's look at really how retirement planning works on the very simple surface, right? We're expected to need about 70 to 80% of our pre-retirement income. So if we've got a couple making $100,000, the thought is they're going to retire and only need about $70,000 per year to give them the retirement lifestyle that they want. The average couple, again, link on here, the average couple makes about $2,000 in Social Security, and we can all plan on that. That's sure as the sun rising tomorrow, right? So that's about $2,600 per year that we can plan on in retirement, and we're expected that we can withdraw safely about 4% of the accumulated assets that we have at that time. And we're going to go into the detail behind all of this, but this is how retirement planning today is accomplished for most people. Okay, so let's figure out what we need to accumulate, right? If we're planning, let's put this on the top, if we're planning on needing $70,000 per year in income, we're going to get $2,600 in Social Security. Then let's take the $70,000 minus $26,544, which means we need to come up with $43,456. This is our shortfall, right? This is what we need to be able to produce from our savings. So I'm going to take that number and I'm going to really simply divide it by 4%. Get my calculator working here. Divide by 0.04. And that's going to tell us that we need to accumulate about $1 million, right? So $1 million in retirement assets. We're on track to get $3 million. So somewhere in between the 1 and the 3, we are beautiful. We're made in the shade. It's all golden. This retirement stuff is simple, right? Let's shut it off, forget about it, and let's go have some fun. So what could possibly go wrong with all of this, right? So here's where we start to get into some of the problems, right? If you're here on this webinar, you might realize that there are some things wrong with this strategy. So I'm going to bring in a couple of pictures. I'm going to kind of bring this to light here. Let's see if I can do this. All right, so as we try to figure out what could potentially go wrong, I'm going to just kind of throw some highlights in here, some news lights, low lights, I guess we would say. The dot-com bubble has burst in 2001, right? I mean, most people on this probably remember that. We then had Fannie and Freddie, the most expensive bailout in the history of our country after the 2008 real estate crisis, which led to Lehman Brothers bankruptcy, a pretty big collapse, which led to even more collapses. Lehman Brothers totters, Merrill sinks, or seeks buyer, AIG hunts for cash, which led to the experience that most of us probably still have relatively fresh in our minds. 2008, right, one of the largest crashes in the history of our country. And then did we learn our lessons? Well, maybe. Well, maybe not. Let's put back the same people who were kind of running that fiasco. Let's put them right back into power. And what has this all done for us or people who have their money invested in the markets? Well, not a whole lot, right? From 2000 to 2014, adjusted for inflation, the market's actually negative for most people. So we really only have one chance to do retirement. We have one chance to do it right. There really are no do-overs. The challenge with starting off where we started off, when we look at retirement very simplistically saying, if I save money in a 401k and the market gives me 12% on average and I get a company sponsored match, I'm going to have $3 million. And we shut off our mind, we shut off our thoughts, and we just do it. And before we know it, we pick up our head and we're in a completely different spot than where we thought we would be. So let's actually look at what that spot is for most people and how this starts to play out for most people. So the sobering truth, 92% of Americans believe there's a retirement crisis. That's a lot. That's a lot of people. You're probably one of those people if you're on this webinar today. 71% of people do not believe that they will be able to retire in comfort. The golden years for many people are quickly turning into something drastically different. Nearly 50% of the middle class will retire at or near poverty. That is depressing. That's depressing. That means someone half the people they're going to retire at or near poverty. 2 out of 3 retirees rely on Social Security for at least 50% of their income, and 1 in 3 rely on it for 90% of their income. This webinar, we're not going to talk too much about the stability of Social Security, but I mean, what kind of retirement is that? 61% of retirees are more concerned about outliving their money than they are about dying. And to me, that's just sad. Most people are working hard for the majority of their life to save up and be prepared for retirement, and it is not working out for most people. So I'm going to throw in a quick definition here. We've all heard of this, Albert Einstein. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So this webinar, we're really going to focus on the problem. And if you're on this webinar, we have to realize that there is a problem with traditional financial planning. And that if we continue to follow that traditional financial plan and we end up with the same results as everyone else is getting, but we think we're going to get something different, what does that say about us collectively? So this is something for me. Nearly everything taught in traditional financial model is either misleading, dangerous, or outright wrong. Nearly everything taught is misleading, dangerous, or outright wrong. We're going to go through this webinar and I'm going to show you why traditional financial planning is so difficult. It is based on partial truths at best. All right, so traditional model of retirement planning has failed. I'm going to give you another Einstein quote to lead us into what we're going to be talking about today. So Einstein said, to solve the retirement problem, we must first define it. Einstein said when he was given a challenge that he would take about 1 hour, if he had about 1 hour to save the world, he would spend the first 55 minutes defining the problem and then only the next subsequent 5 minutes coming up with a solution. So what this really leads me to believe, and as I've shared this strategy with clients, once we understand the problem, defining the solution is easy. But until we understand the problem, we're dazed, we're confused, we're hoping that the same actions will lead to a different result. So we have to first define the problem, and only then can we move into defining the solution. So the three problems that this webinar is going to focus on is problem number one. We don't know what the real goal is. We're sold a bill of goods. We're sold something different from Wall Street, from advertisements, from the Main Street media, and it's not really what the real goal is. Because we don't know what the real goal is, we end up spending the majority of our time, effort, and energy doing something that is completely wrong. The problem with assumptions. This is actually where we're going to spend the majority of the time on this webinar, is looking at what havoc building our financial plan based off assumptions will actually wreak on our financial plan. So, and the last one is thinking the rate of return is the answer. Everything that we're sold is put our money here, put our money there, and we're going to grow it more efficiently. We actually need to do something exactly the opposite. So problem number one, we don't know what the real goal is. We're using a broken model. I'm going to go back to this retirement number, right? We're taught that we need to grow our assets to a sufficient number. And if we grow our assets to a sufficient number, then one day we'll be able to convert that magic number into a stream of income. But herein lies the problem. Retirement has nothing or very little to do with the number. What retirement actually has to do with is creating income from that number. So I'm going to give you an analogy here, and we're going to talk about what the real goal of retirement planning truly is. To do this, I want to give you an analogy. Let's say you had the lifelong goal of hiking, one of the greatest mountains out there. So if you wanted to hike Mount Everest, right, and this is your ultimate goal right here, let's say you decided to do this, you're probably not going to do this on your own, and you decided to hire yourself a guide, right? And that guide starts you off down here at the bottom, and he says, okay, you know what? I am really, really good at getting people to the top. In fact, I've got an extremely good track record of getting people to the top. So you start off with me down here at the bottom, and I'm going to show you exactly what to do step by step to get you to the top of this Mount Everest. And when you get up to the top of Mount Everest, you're excited, you've done it, you take some pictures, only then to realize that your guide in this case only specializes in getting people to the top. And actually coming back down the mountain, there's maybe a 50-50 chance that he's going to get you back down. At that point, you're going to be really, really frustrated, dramatically underprepared. And, in order to complete this journey, you have to have a plan to not only get up the mountain, but also get back down the mountain. So this analogy is really similar to our financial lives. In our financial life, there is really two parts to our financial journey. We've got to get up the mountain, but we've got to also get back down the mountain. And coming back down the mountain, this is the distribution phase of our life. This is when we turn our assets into income, and this is the accumulation phase of our life. So if we look at this, the financial world in general, they sell us a bill of goods around putting our money here or there, asset allocation, diversification, the whole bill of goods to grow our money. But growth is only half of the intended strategy, right? The real strategy is no matter what we've grown, we want to be able to turn it into a stream of income. So I'm going to ask you this. What is the true purpose of your savings? Is it to grow it, or is it to generate income? And it's hard to really determine that from on the forefront, but I'm going to tell you this. The number one goal of our retirement is to generate income. And how we generate income is largely dependent on where and how we choose to grow our assets. If we grow our assets in the wrong accounts, i.e. 401ks, market-based accounts, we will by default have a lower stream of income because we chose to grow our money in in the wrong location. So I'm going to give you kind of a sailing analogy with this. Back in olden times, as sailors would sail around the world, they used the North Star as a guide to keep sailors on track. So they used the North Star because it provided a stable marker. It never moved. It remains fixed at all times relative to the rotation of the Earth and the subsequent movement of the other stars in the sky. Our retirement goal, our North Star, is income. When we know that our retirement goal is income, we can now base every one of our decisions, our financial decisions, as to where we grow our money and how we position our money as to first and foremost maximize our stream of income. So North Star, true goal, is income. So that's problem number one. We build our financial plan based off of a false goal. All right, so when we understand the ultimate goal, and really the goal is two parts, right? We want to be able to first start off with income. Where should we accumulate our assets to generate the most efficient stream of income? And number two, how do we grow our assets the most effectively, right? It's not growth at the exclusion of income or vice versa. So we need to have a plan to get up the mountain, but we also need to have a plan to get down the mountain. So I'm going to give you a really quick way to kind of back of the napkin determine how much you need to accumulate. And again, using traditional models. So we're going to use something called the Rule of 25. And the Rule of 25 is very simply, depending on the amount of income that you need or want in retirement, you need to have accumulated about 25 times that amount in assets. So 25 times that amount in assets. So all we do is start off with our retirement goal. I'm going to keep the numbers really, really simple here. You can do these on your own. But let's say we have an individual whose goal is $100,000. And let's just say, for the sake of conversation, that this individual is going to be receiving $50,000 in fixed income sources. Social Security, pension, that type of stuff. Now, I realize pensions, that's kind of a relic of the past, but just for the sake of this discussion, this individual now has a savings gap of $50,000. They need to have accumulated enough assets that when they get to the top of this mountain peak, those assets can generate $50,000 of income for them, okay? So how do we determine what we need to do? Okay, so I'm going to bring down a couple calculators here, and we're going to determine how to do this. All right, so using the Rule of 25, if we need $50,000 of income, I'm going to take that and I'm going to multiply it by 25. What this tells us is now we need $1.25 million in accumulated assets. So 1250 in accumulated assets. Let's just say, for the sake of this calculation here, let's say the individual is age 50. They have $250,000 already accumulated, and let's just say that they're saving $20,000 per year, okay? And the goal is to retire at age 60. Age 65. So we've got 15 years to do it, right? So $250,000 now. We know we need to get to $1.2 million, and we're saving $20,000 a year. So over 15 years, now we can backtrack and we can say, okay, we need to earn 7.16%. Now, if this individual is not saving any money, they need to earn 11%. If this individual is not going to have a pension and they are going to have to generate more income from their savings, you can kind of see how this works out here. But nonetheless, now that we know what our rate of return is, we can now start to determine, okay, where do we need to put our assets? We want to focus first and foremost on income, but where do we need to put our assets to grow our money? This webinar is not going to be focused on growing assets. This webinar is positioning assets So if you want some strategies on how to grow your assets more effectively, go to the Growing Wealth section of the webinar. So we're going to skip right over that. In the Growing Wealth section of the webinar, you'll learn some very unique strategies for bridging your gap, okay? So that's number one. Problem number one, we need to know what our goal is. And our goal is to generate cash flow, and then we work backwards. Problem number two, it is the retirement plan that we use today is predominantly built off assumptions. And this is a huge danger for people as they move into retirement. So there's 6 fundamental retirement planning questions, and these 6 fundamental retirement planning questions can be broken down into 2 different categories. We've got our accumulation questions, how many assets do I need to accumulate? And we've got our distribution assumptions. Based on where I accumulate those assets, how much income can I generate off the accumulation? So we're going to go through each one of these in more detail, but quickly, how much accumulated assets do I need to retire? How will inflation impact or affect this number? How does life expectancy impact this number? And I'll tell you, these 2 things, most people don't think about this. Most financial planners don't really talk about this, and we use assumptions. The next one is, how much annual income can I safely take from my assets? How does volatility, and this is just a fancy word for market risk, how does volatility within the market impact the longevity, or how long my money will ultimately last me? And how will taxes impact my spendable income? So you can see here, there's a whole laundry list of assumptions, of questions that we need to ask here to be able to map out our financial plan. Financial planners, they like to dispute among themselves as to whose guesses and predictions are better. That is to say, how close can they get to beating a particular index over a sustained period of time? When it comes to retirement planning, building your plan on a laundry list of assumptions, it's kind of akin to building your house on a pile of quicksand. It's not too long before the entire thing sinks and falls apart. So let's examine each one of these, and we're going to really look at how each one of these assumptions impacts the overall financial plan that an individual is putting together. So the question is, why is it that most retirement plans fail? And you kind of answered that question as we've gone. It's really because of assumptions. Right? Your retirement plan using traditional financial strategies is literally built on assumptions. And it is difficult, to say the least, next to impossible is probably an easier way to say it, to accurately predict all of these assumptions that we've just covered right here, all 6 assumptions, and each one of them need to be predicted and adequately forecasted in order for your retirement plan using traditional strategies to succeed. So let's dive in and let's actually just look at each one of the assumptions. So we're going to start off on the accumulation side of the mountain. What assumptions are we making as we're going up this mountain? How much accumulated assets do we need to retire? What will inflation do to the amount of assets that we need? And what does life expectancy do to the amount of assets that we think we need as we move into retirement? Okay, all right, so as we move into the first one, how much accumulated assets do we need to retire? When determining this number, it's standard to assume that you're going to need about 70%. This is what most retirement planners kind of plan on, is 70 to 80% of pre-retirement income, because you're not going to incur some of the same expenses that you did during your working years. I mean, think about it. You're probably not going to be putting money into a 401k anymore. Your home might be paid off. Your kids are probably gone. Things associated with our life as we're accumulating assets, we kind of assume that those will be gone. So, could the opposite not also be true? Why do they call it the golden years, right? I mean, that's the main question. If we're saving for retirement, why are we calling it the golden years? The reality is most people, or many people, have put off or deferred many of their dreams and aspirations to when they could slow down and actually get away from the office without sneaking an email response or jumping on a conference call while on vacation. So could it also be true that rather than needing 70% of your pre-retirement income to fund your dreams, could it not also be true that you would need at least the same income, if not more? Your expenses could go up. Think in terms of Saturdays. So what day of the week right now do you typically spend the most money? If you're like me, it's on the weekend. During the week, I'm busy enough with work and with family and soccer and all the things that keep me busy that I just don't spend any money. But on the weekend, this is when I do the majority of my leisure activities. I spend more money. In retirement, every day is a Saturday, right? So could we not assume that we might need more money in retirement? So how does this impact your situation? So here's one big thing that many retirement planners fail to consider as they think about their numbers. Okay, so for many Americans, the thing that could cause this assumption to go up is healthcare. Healthcare is likely to be the largest expense that most people will face in retirement, and most people just don't plan for it. At least 70% of the people over 65 are going to need long-term care services to support them at some point in their lives. The national median daily rate in 2014 for a private room in a nursing home is $240. $240 a day. The average length of a nursing home stay is 835 days, more than 2 years, and Medicare does not cover the cost of long-term care. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this on the next page, so I won't go into too much of that, but I want to challenge the idea of this assumption. So let's just say that we've got an individual and they've got $100,000. At 75 or at 70%, we're assuming that they need to have $70,000 in income to give them the lifestyle that they want, right? And that $70,000, that would mean that they would need to have about $1.7 million saved. Now, if part of this $70,000 is coming from Social Security, that would bring that number down, obviously. But just to make the math simple, that would mean they would need about $1.7 million. But if we said that person would want the same $100,000, right? If they have a $100,000 income, and now that we know about long-term care and we've budgeted our bucket list, if we now say we need 100% of our assets, we would now need $2.5 million, right? And the difference there, it's quite astounding. So I'm going to bring down a rate calculator here. The difference between planning for retirement and having 1.7 million, oops, one extra zero there, versus 2.5 million, the difference between these two, it's a 47% difference. A 47% difference that one assumption can make, right? That's a big difference. So let's look at the next one and let's kind of keep going down this rabbit hole of assumptions. So the next set of assumptions are the two underlining assumptions. How will inflation impact this number, and how does life expectancy impact the ultimate number that we need to accumulate? The first one that we're going to tackle is inflation, right? So we all know what inflation is. We can see it at the gas pump, we can see it at the grocery store, at the movie theater, almost anywhere that we spend money today. I call inflation the silent tax because inflation is a direct result of our government's monetary policy. An easy way to think about this is the more money that is printed or injected into the economy, i.e. quantitative easing, if there is not a subsequent rise in products or services to buy, then the same products get more expensive. Our money, our dollars become less valuable going down. So the assumption that most people use as they go into retirement is inflation is going to be 3%. If they plan for inflation at all, most financial planners that I've seen plan on inflation being 3%. So let's just take a quick understanding. Where did this number come from? Well, it's nothing more than a guess. And the reason that this guess is for the past 15 to 20 years, that has been the average inflation reported by the government. Now, whether you want to believe this number and the validity of the government's reporting of what inflation truly is, that's a different story. But from the last 15, 20 years, that's the government's CPI reporting of what inflation truly is. But this hides some of when we look at inflation at such a micro level, it hides some of the bigger issues with inflation when we look at it at a macro level. In fact, during the 70s to the 80s, inflation was almost double digits. It was anywhere between 5 to 10% in the late 70s and early 80s. And so if we assume that we're going to go into retirement with a 3% inflation rate and something changes, this will have a dramatic impact on what we need. So inflation literally cuts our purchasing power of our dollar. So at 3% inflation, it takes 24 years for the value of our dollar to be cut in half. And what that means is if you need $100,000 today, 24 years from now, you need $200,000 to give you the same lifestyle as $100,000 does today. But look at the difference. If inflation ends up being 4%, it only takes 18 years for the value of our money to be cut in half. So in 18 years, you would now need $200,000 to give you the same lifestyle, and it's likely that that number would double again within your lifetime. If inflation is 5%, it only takes 14.5 years for the value of your money to be cut in half. So this assumption that inflation is 3% and it's going to stay 3% all the way through your retirement, that's a pretty dangerous assumption to make when we're determining how much assets we need to accumulate. Finally, one glaring issue for retirees that is not considered in standard inflation numbers, the CPI, is the cost of healthcare. And many experts say that healthcare is going up by 20% on average, 20% per year. So a married couple who retire at age 65, actually, no, let's go down here. Fidelity Investments estimates that $240 is needed just for healthcare. So when you go into retirement, you need $240,000 set aside just for healthcare. This does not cover long-term care. 70% of people over age 65, in addition to the 240, will need some type of a long-term care coverage throughout the course of their life. So inflation combined with life expectancy is one of the most dangerous 1-2 punch combinations for a retirement plan. Because what that ultimately means is the longer we live, the harder and the harder it's going to be to make this work. So let's actually look at life expectancy, the second one here. If you are a male going into retirement at age 65, there's an 82% chance you're going to make it to age 80. There's a 70% chance you're going to make it to age 85. There's a 50% chance that you're going to make it to age 90. Female, a little bit higher, right? All across the board, 57% chance that female's making it to age 90. But here's where it becomes extremely difficult. When there is a couple going into retirement together, there is an 80% chance that at least one of them is going to make it to age 90 and a 50% chance that at least one of them is going to make it to age 95. What this means is today, you need to plan on making your money last for at least 30 years. And that's a daunting task because that's almost as long as you've spent accumulating the invested assets that you have at this point. So the question is, where do these life expectancy numbers come from? So insurance companies, they use large aggregate data to determine life expectancy. And they can tell you on average, a U.S. male lives to the age of 86, and on average, a U.S. female lives to the age of 89. For groups like insurance companies who collect life expectancy data on large groups of people, using averages is just fine because in the end, it all averages out. But the problem with averages when it comes to your retirement is it has nothing to do with you. It's not going to tell you how long you are going to live. In fact, you could care less what the average is, quite honestly, right? I mean, yes, you want your neighbors and your fellow retirees to live a long time, but that doesn't have anything to do with your life. All you really care about and all you really need to know is how long you are going to live and how long your spouse is going to live. An average is simply just a midpoint. It's not the bedrock of a financial plan. So think about how critical this assumption is. It impacts everything you need, and if you plan on living to age 85 and you end up living longer, if you end up beating the average, what does that mean? It means you don't have enough money to last. But same thing holds true if you plan on living to age 95 and you end up passing at age 85, you didn't spend your money as efficiently or as effectively as you could have. You left money on the table. So this one assumption makes retirement planning virtually impossible for most people. So the bottom line of these assumptions as we're accumulating assets is it's virtually impossible. In fact, it's improbable for you, your financial advisor, or even me to predict what number is right for you, how long you're going to live. But I want you to know that there are solutions for this, right? There are real solutions to solve these real problems. We're going to go into this in the next one. And again, going back to Einstein, once we define the problem, the solution becomes easy. So we're going to scroll now to the next section of our financial plan and the assumptions coming down the mountain, right? So the real purpose, our North Star, remember, is cash flow, right? This is what we're ultimately saving for. So in traditional financial planning, what are the assumptions that we make here? First one is, how much annual income can you safely take from your accumulated assets? How does the sequence of returns or market volatility impact how long your money is going to last? And how will taxes impact your spendable income? So let's dive in and let's look at the second set of assumptions on the income side in traditional financial planning. The first one that we're going to look at is how much accumulated asset, or how much you can safely take from your accumulated assets. All right, so this first one, we're going to look at a graph here on how much annual income you can safely take from your assets. What this really comes down to is it comes down to something that today most people refer to as the 4% rule. When most people move into retirement, the majority of their savings are tied to the markets. This is how most people save. It can be quite a challenge given the volatility of the markets. When you're in the accumulation phase of your life, you can at least stomach the volatility somewhat, right? Because your savings are not needed to maintain your lifestyle. If we lose 20% in the market and you're still working, yeah, it sucks that we lost money from our savings, but it doesn't affect your lifestyle because that's really where your earned income is providing your lifestyle. However, once you move into retirement, earned income goes away and your lifestyle is funded completely or I guess primarily by your savings, right? This is what makes market volatility such a challenge for people in retirement. It can ultimately wreak havoc on a well-crafted retirement plan built off assumptions. So to help kind of mitigate the challenges of market volatility, when we talk about market performance, we tend to do so based on averages. And while it's true, yes, the market might average 7 to 10% over a 30, 40, 50 year period of time, historically it's true that happens. But when we retire, we don't care about averages. The only thing that really matters when we retire is what happens in the market tomorrow or a year from now or the 10 to 15, 20 years into your retirement. So that's really all that matters. Averages don't matter anymore. So conventional strategies will attempt to reduce the complexities of the market into withdrawal rates. And that's really what this 4% rule is it doesn't matter how much assets you have, how much can you afford to take as an income stream from your accumulated assets. So this graph, all it does is it measures three different variables or three different things. The probability of running out of money, years into retirement, and the associated withdrawal rates. So let's just say we have $1 million in accumulated assets, okay? And really quickly and simply, what we can see here is if we take an 8% withdrawal rate, 8% of $1 million, that equals $80,000 per year in income, right? And that might get you pretty close to what your goals are in retirement. But here's the challenge. If we go 20 years into retirement and we follow this graph out, there is about a 75% chance that we have ran out of money. There's nothing left of this $1 million to show for. There's a 25% chance that we still have something. And success with this strategy, it's just having a positive portfolio. So if you drew your portfolio down to $1 and died the next day, this would be successful. So obviously this isn't what most people are looking for. They don't want to get 20 years into retirement and be out of money because we talked about, hey, between you and your spouse, you need to make your money last for 30 years. And so the associated withdrawal rates today are somewhere between 3 to 4%. At 4%, what that ultimately means is your income now is $40,000. 4% of $1 million is $40,000. But now there's about an 85% chance that 35 years into retirement, you still have $1 left. So that's where this 4% withdrawal rate rule came from, is it's there to try to help mitigate the probability of running out of retirement. But as we can see, it creates a whole new problem, right? $40,000 of annual income, that's not really the golden years, is it? And one other challenge, and we're going to look at this on the next one, 4% rule was really created back before interest rates got as crazy as they are right now. With interest rates as low as they are right now, the 4% rule, many people say, and including the experts who came up with this, in fact, Wade Pfau, the one who really is one of the lead researchers behind the 4% rule, he says it cannot be treated as a safe initial withdrawal rate in today's low interest rate environment. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what that actually means. But this is assumption number one, that you can withdraw 4% of your accumulated assets. Okay, so let's move on to the next assumption here under this first one. So how does the sequence of returns, i.e. market volatility, impact the longevity of assets, how long your money is going to survive? Now, with this is kind of an interesting discussion here. So it would seem logical that if your average rate of return in the market is 7%, you could simply take 7% distribution, interest only, and never run out of money, right? But this would assume that the market moves up in a straight line, every year 7%. What we know is the market goes something like this, right? There's ups and there's downs. So when the market is volatile, because the market is volatile, it makes it impossible to take the interest rate that you expect to earn over an average period of time. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a little case study to kind of prove this out. All right, and this case study is going to be with Mr. Smith and Miss Jones. They both have the exact same retirement portfolio. They both have $1 million, 60% allocated to stocks, 40% to bonds. They're both planning on taking 100% or $100,000 of annual income because the interest rate that they're earning is about 10%, right? So if they're earning a 10% rate of return on average over a 30-year period of time, should they not be able to take about 10% out as income? The only difference between these two is when they retire. Mr. Smith retires in 1969 and Miss Jones retires in 1979. So let's bring up Mr. Smith first. All right, so Mr. Smith, what we can see here is Mr. Smith, over this 30-year period of time, retiring in 1969, his average rate of return is 10.98%. He has $1 million, and we're now going to start taking out income, right? $100,000 every single year. So as we do this, what we notice is in the first year, $1 million comes out, but we lose money. The market goes down, 2.6% negative rate of return. That we take money out and we lose money, and so our account balance goes down to $876. When we gain money the next year, when we earn a 5.3% rate of return, we're now only earning it on $876,000. So we earn $41,000 of interest, but we take $100,000 out. In 1973 and 74, there's 2 losses in a row. We take our income, we stomach the losses, and before we know it, in 1981, 12 years after the fact, we're literally out of money, right? Mr. Smith has run out of money simply based on the volatility of the markets. So now if we bring in Miss Jones is going to do the exact same thing, right? She's just retiring 10 years later in 1979. Her average rate of return is the same 10%, and she takes $100,000 out of her portfolio every single year. But in 1979, gosh, the market went on a crazy run. And look at that. Her account, even though she's taking out $100,000, it gains in value every single year. Down in 2000, she suffered her first 3 losses. But by that point, she had $3 million, even though she had taken out income every single year. And in 2008, when this 30-year experiment ends, she ended up taking out $100,000 every single year, totaling $3 million in income, and she had $2.7 million of assets to boot. So as it turns out, the amount of money that you can afford to spend to support your lifestyle is just as dependent on the order of your investment returns as what the actual investment returns are. If your money is allocated to the market, you have to ask yourself 3 questions, right? Question number 1, can you predict your investment return? Question number 2, can you spend the portfolio average? And number 3, does it all average out over time, right? I mean, here was Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith was out of money, where Miss Jones, the only difference was she had a different sequence of returns, and her portfolio went up. So when you get ready to retire, right, so when you get up here to your mountain, where did our mountain go? The most dangerous time for a person to retire the most dangerous time for a person to lose money in terms of a market loss is the 5 to 7 years before retirement and the 5 to 7 years after. I mean, think about it this way. The 40% loss that everyone experienced in 2008, if you lost 40% on $100,000, it still sucks, right? It's not a good thing to lose 40%, but if you lost 40% up here where you had $1 million, right, the percentage is the same, but the impact is quite a bit different. So this is where we need to be extremely cautious as we're approaching retirement. And maybe what you could do is right before you're going to retire, just call up your stockbroker or your financial advisor and get the 5 to 7 year outlook of the market, right? If he or she tells you that it's going to be good, you're good to go, retire, right? If your stockbroker can't tell you that, maybe we have to come up with a different solution. So let's go into the last assumption here before we move into problem number 3. All right, last assumption. This is a dangerous one. It's a scary one. It's one that no one likes to talk about. But last assumption is, how will taxes impact your spendable income? So I'm going to hit this one really, really quick because we've gone up to this point pretty quick, and I don't want to give you too much bad information. I don't want you to be totally sad. So if you want more information on this, I've written an ebook and I've recorded a whole webinar series on why taxes is such a dangerous liability that most people are facing. So if you want to know just how big of a risk it is to defer your taxes, which is what most people are doing, go to the advanced education part of the section and you can watch the webinar and read the ebook there and really get more information. I'm just going to hit this high level. So this message right here, this comes from David Walker, right? And David Walker, here on Fox Business News, he's talking about the 4 things that will guarantee All right, guarantee that you will pay more in income taxes in retirement. But I thought this is kind of contradictory, right? I mean, why can we say we're going to pay more in income taxes? We were always told that taxes were going to go down, right? Weren't you always told you're going to retire in a lower tax bracket? So let's find out, who is David Walker. David Walker, he's the former comptroller of the U.S. government. So this is equivalent to the CPA, or the chief auditor of the U.S. government. And he left the government in 2011. He served under the Bush and the Clinton administration, so he knows better than anyone the inner workings of the financial situation of the U.S. government. He finally couldn't take it anymore, and he resigned in 2008, and he immediately went on the campaign trail to let everyone know the trouble that we are all facing. So like a slow-moving ship, it's kind of hard to change the direction of an entire country, and despite all of his warnings, what has the government been doing? It's been going into more and more debt, making more and more promises, waging war, doing all kinds of different things. So it's hard to say which one of these assumptions that we've gone through today is going to be the most detrimental, but taxes probably could be the most detrimental, because most people, the majority of their money is in a tax-deferred account. And what David Walker talks about is, he says the problem facing taxes and the reason why it's inevitable that taxes will go up, it's math. The government literally cannot support all of the promises that it's made. And so there's 4 reasons: entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, that type of stuff; debt. For retirees going into retirement, we lose the majority of the deductions that we once had; and inflation. I explain all of these things in that extra webinar, so I'm not going to go into this a whole lot more. But what David Walker says is the math just does not add up, and it is mathematically impossible for the taxes to stay where they're at. And he actually says by the year 2020, one of 2 things has to happen. Entitlements have to be eliminated or dramatically cut. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, eliminated or dramatically cut. Or taxes have to double. Now imagine this. Imagine going into retirement thinking that you're going to retire in a lower tax bracket. And not only do you not retire in a lower tax bracket, your taxes ultimately double. How would that make you feel? How would that determine what your income ultimately is and what your retirement ultimately is? So if you didn't have the North Star of cash flow, right? If you didn't know what you were saving for to begin with, you're probably like most people, and you put your money in a 401k thinking that you're going to retire in a lower tax bracket. So, I won't do any math on this, but just imagine what that would be like. This is the former comptroller of the U.S. government telling us that this mathematically has to happen. So that's the last assumption. I'm going to take a deep breath. There's a lot of stuff to go through, right? Those were big assumptions, and that's a lot of difficult information to stomach. And really what I wanted to relay with that, it is virtually impossible. No one can have the right answers to all 6 assumptions. And without the right answers, our retirement plan for most people is literally built on quicksand. Any change in the assumptions could change everything completely. All right, so with that, let's move on to problem number 3. Problem number 3 is going to wrap it up, and this is what's going to prep us for the next webinar that's going to solve all of these problems. So how do we fix these problems? Do we fix them with rate of return, or do we fix them a different way? So growing your assets at a better rate of return, it might be one way to look at it, and that's kind of Wall Street's solution, but I'm actually going to tell you that there's a different way to solve this problem, and it doesn't have really anything to do with rate of return. All right, so with this problem, scroll down here, let me ask you a question, okay? And I've kind of already answered this question, but there's, it's one that is kind of hard to come to grips with, because it flies directly in the face of nearly everything that we've been taught about personal finance. What will make the bigger difference on your retirement plan? Getting a better rate of return or a better distribution rate? Remember, our North Star is all about income. And in the next webinar, I'm going to talk about how to get a better distribution rate. But when I say distribution rate on our accumulated assets, this is really what we want to focus on. We want to focus on putting our money in a place where we can actually get more income from it. And what this inevitably has the effect of doing is it allows us to retire on a far smaller number. If we can minimize or mitigate taxes, get rid of market volatility, overcome life expectancy, all of those things that we were guessing at before, we can ultimately take the same assets that we would have had and generate a larger income. So let's look at a little case study to kind of prove this out. All right, to preface this case study, we're going to look at the updated safe withdrawal rate. So Wade Pfau, again, he's one of the masterminds behind the 4% rule, and he's telling us based on interest rates and increased market volatility, if we want less than a 1% probability of failure, if we want our money to last 38 years, no longer is it a 4% rule, it's actually a 1.8% rule. So again, if we have $1 million and we can only take 1.8% to give us a less than 1% probability that we don't run out of money, man, our income just went from potentially $40,000 to $1,800 per year. That's a huge difference, right? If we think we want our money to only last us 25 years, 2.3% and 3.1%. So now that the 4% rule is kind of being called into question, and it's an assumption that's not really working according to Wade Pfau, if this is what we're shooting for, what does this ultimately do for us in retirement? So going from a 4% distribution rate to a 3.1 distribution rate is equivalent to losing 25% of your portfolio, or $250,000. Going from 4% to 2.3% is equivalent to losing $425,000, and 4% to 1.85% is equivalent to losing 55% of your accumulated value. If you wanted to focus on rate of return, if you wanted to make up the difference and grow a bigger balance so you could get the same income off a 1.8% rate of return, in addition to the rate of return that we calculated up above, you would need to earn an additional 17.3% every single year to grow your balance large enough to support the same income as you wanted off a 1.8% distribution. At 3.1, it's 5.23%. I know these are a lot of numbers. The main thing to take from this, it's mathematically impossible. Retiring on a set of assumptions, using these assumptions, planning on these assumptions, and basing your entire retirement off these assumptions, it's akin to, again, building your house on quicksand, right? So here's how we're going to close this out. Our goal is really two parts. The first part of our goal is our North Star, right? We want to focus on the income side of our plan first. And we want to position our assets so we have the best, most efficient stream of income. We then, once we've got the best, most efficient stream of income and we know what assets to position ourselves into, we then can focus on what the right accumulation is, and it really has to be a two-part goal. We want to climb and reach the summit. We want to accumulate assets, but we don't want to do this at the detriment of our income. So in the next webinar, this is really where I'm going to show you the retirement income secret, right? It's not how much money you have when you retire, it's how much money you get back, right? What your income is, that really, really counts. That's what we're all saving for anyway. We're not saving to have a big balance in some, Magellan or Fidelity account. We're saving to retire, and retirement takes income. So a quick recap on the three problems that we went through. If we don't know the real goal, we're aiming in the wrong destination. The real goal truly is cash flow. It's income. The problem with assumptions is these assumptions, there are too many of them, and they will literally wreck our retirement plan. Getting one of them wrong is going to destroy everything that we've planned. We have to have a financial plan built on a solid foundation. Without that solid foundation, our retirement plan is literally built on hope. We don't know what we have, but we hope it works out okay. And that might work well on Sunday, but it does not work well in a financial plan. The last thing is thinking that we can solve this problem with the rate of return. Rate of return is only part of it, but it's the smaller part of it. We must position our assets first and foremost for cash flow. We must mitigate, minimize, and get rid of altogether the assumptions. And then we must focus on putting our money in places that will ultimately give us more cash flow through a higher distribution rate. So in the next webinar, I'm going to show you how you can have more income, literally 20 to 80% more income, without having to gamble, without having to try to gamble for this higher rate of return, or without having to eat dog food, right? Those are the only two solutions that we came up with looking at all these problems. Take higher risk to potentially get higher reward, or just get used to living at the poverty line or below. That's not what this is about. So we can do one of two things, right? You can turn this off and say, man, this was too much, gets crazy, I'm just not going to do it. We can stick our head in the sand and hope that this is not the ultimate reality. Or, and I hope you do this, and join me on the next webinar. The next webinar is really the solution, and that's really what this is all about. This one, man, I'm right at an hour. I appreciate you sitting through this with me. Unbuckle your seatbelt, take a drink of water, take a deep breath. I know I'm going to. Hopefully this was valuable for you. Now that we understand truly the nature of the problems and how fundamental and how deep these problems go, we can now focus on the solution. And honestly, the solution's easy. Once we've got the problems, we know we can look at the right things to do to make the right outcome. So join me on webinar number two, and I'll look forward to seeing you there. Thanks, guys.